Alan, what do you see as the big challenges for IT operations today?
The challenges, Simon, they're all around complexity and cost. What we're seeing is a growth in the last several years in IT departments with numbers of systems, with cable complexity, with the requirements for power and cooling of those systems. So certainly what we've been trying to do is look at solutions to address those issues that customers have been having.
Now, I understand that you're seeing customers buying a lot of kind of ad hoc systems and then having to run them all in parallel.
Exactly right. So in the past, kind of the modus operandi has been you buy systems based on a project. You go out and you might buy from vendor A for this project, vendor B for that project. And over time, what you get is a proliferation of systems, a complexity of management, greater and greater power requirements, and a relatively low utilisation of those pretty expensive assets. So people are looking at things like server consolidation, virtualisation projects, simplified cabling with converged networking technologies to try and help them simplify what became a very expensive and complex environment.
If an organisation wants to address complexity, what kind of technologies do you think they should be considering to get this job done?
All right, well, there's a couple of easy steps to reduce your costs and your complexity. The first step on the journey is consolidation. So if you look at the sort of technologies we've got today, organisations, we're seeing around an 8-to-1, 9-to-1 consolidation, just with the latest hardware, the latest capabilities of our high-end systems. So if you had 30, 40 servers in a couple of racks, we could easily reduce that now down to, for example, one blade chassis.
Okay, but it's often said to me that server consolidation might be the low-hanging fruit for this kind of transformation.
You're exactly right. As I said, that's the first step on the journey. So that lets you reduce your capital expenses and your ongoing expenses and the complexity. The next step is probably virtualisation, and most people will combine those two. So their virtualisation project will be a consolidation project.
Whenever I hear about a complex IT environment, people say to me, look, virtualisation, it's almost a silver bullet. Stop treating things as little islands of functionality attached to a particular application and turn it into a lovely pool of computing resource you can tap into as and when needed. Is that as simple as it sounds?
Well, it's one step on the journey. What you're talking about is some people's definition of cloud computing, right? What we've seen as people have gone to virtualisation, they've been able to consolidate their physical assets. So yes, you reduce the number of systems, you reduce that complexity, but you also make, for example, deployment of a new system easier. Now that may be great initially when you look at it, but what happens is you introduce a new level of complexity, which is suddenly you get this explosion in the number of virtual machines and you've got to manage that environment.
Okay, so how can you get a handle on your virtual environment? People have been telling me for 20 years that enterprise management is wonderful and will save time.
That's right. Yeah, well, enterprise management's wonderful and will save time. The real answer is you need to look at a management solution that will manage your virtual environment as well as your physical environments. Plenty of people will sell you a management solution to look after your physical boxes. Ideally, you want one that manages both the physical and the virtual systems, but also ties the two together. So for example, you might want, if a hardware alert comes out of one of your systems, maybe a hard drive's going to die or something in the near future, you'd like to send a message to your virtualization software to move all the virtual machines off that, log a service call, all this sort of automations. So it's important to have a holistic view of your entire environment. And if you've got management tools that manage all of those things, physical and virtual, then you're in good shape.
What else do you think is needed to manage virtualised infrastructure more effectively?
Key is the storage components and the networking components, as well as the compute components. So a good SAN is obviously critical to a virtual environment. You really don't get the benefits of virtualisation unless you've got a shared storage environment. And again, if you can manage that SAN with the same sort of management system as you're doing your server hardware, I think there's an advantage there.
Do Australian organisations have the same challenges as businesses in other parts of the world?
It's a relatively mature market. For example, the adoption of virtualisation in Australia is almost number one in the world. So a very tech-savvy environment. Conversely, there's a large proportion of small to medium businesses in Australia compared to what we see in the US, where we see a lot of very large enterprises. We do have to treat this market slightly differently to what we do in the US, where it's all about the mega corporations. Here there's a lot more focus on, as I say, the small to medium business type environment and what we call the general business large enterprise, getting up to the 1,000 seats and above sort of sizes.
This is a question I kind of get asked a bit in the Australian context is, does owning one rack of stuff make me a data centre? And therefore, are these data centre solutions applicable to me?
Well, the simple answer is yes, it does, absolutely. As soon as you've got a rack, you've got a data centre. In fact, we have some solutions. We have what we call our Blade Centre S solution, which in effect, the chassis and the rack, they look like a kind of big tower or a mini rack. I mean, to me, we call it data centre in a box. That's a data centre as well. It's terminology. I sometimes use the word server room when I'm talking to people in Australia.
Yeah, I like a server room.
Because that has more, people think data centres are huge warehouse-sized buildings. So. But I mean, everyone has the same issues, whether you're half a dozen servers and a little shared storage unit to, the huge organisations. Everyone's running into these power issues, management issues, utilisation issues. So the story's the same, it's just a matter of scale.
What are the metrics that people are coming up against?
Well, there's some interesting figures. IBM did a survey recently. We found in distributing computing environments, about 85% of computing capacity was sitting idle, only about 15% utilisation. So if you think of those expensive assets, if I sold you a car for $50,000 and told you could only drive it 4 days a month, you wouldn't think that was a very good investment. If you're only getting 15%, 10% utilisation out of your hardware, that's a big issue.
If we're going to keep the car analogy going, the petrol that I used in that car would also be a little more expensive than the $1.25 a litre I paid this morning.
Well, you're exactly right. If you look at power and the cooling costs, they're 8 times greater today than they were 12 years ago. So 12 years ago, if I stood in front of a client and talked about the power utilisation of the machine, they'd look at me like I was mad. Today, it's one of the big issues. The cost of powering and cooling a system that you buy over 3 or 4 years is getting to be a significant percentage, 60-70% of the purchase price. So any savings we can make in that area are huge for organisations.
When you're starting to use virtualisation to help you take the complexity out of your organisation, how do you then manage that newly virtualised environment? What are the tricks there?
Well, it's important. I mean, going back to our statistics from this survey, we found that 2009 management costs were 70% of the total IT budget. So about 10 to 15% were being spent on acquiring hardware and software, and about the same on power and cooling costs, and 70% of the budgets are going into just managing things. So management is an area not enough people focus on. They'll focus on, oh, well, this box is $500 cheaper than that box, spend a lot of time on that, but if your purchase costs are only 15, 20% of your total IT budget, you should really be focusing on where 70% of your dollars are going, which is the management system.
So you need to have a think about the systems you're buying and the future costs they're going to impose on your organisation.
Absolutely. So, you'll hear many vendors talk about TCO, total cost of ownership. The point we're getting at there is the dollars you'll spend managing, powering and cooling a machine will far outweigh the dollars you spend buying it. And you should spend more time looking at those facets of a solution when you're evaluating new solutions than on the purchase price.